leverage technology to enhance how prepared your organization is. So is your organization making cybersecurity a primary initiative? Are you guys scared like many of us are? Well, this continuous change in technology creates a very shift in cybersecurity trends, which requires organizations to change the way they handle cybersecurity. So apart from human error, what are the other top concerns and what can you best do to prevent them from impacting your organization? So today we are going to hear from two amazing speakers to hopefully help give you insight. So first, we are very excited to have Steve with us, and Steve Losefsky.
There you go.
Steven is a seasoned entrepreneur and executive with more than 20 years in management technology, technology services, consulting, and strategic planning. He's worked very closely with the executive team to help lead Medicus to becoming one of the top healthcare-focused MSPs in the US. And before joining Medicus, he was the founder and CEO of Information Strategy Design, based out of warm Phoenix, Arizona. And he's also previously served as the VP of Operations for National Real Estate Investments and Property Management firm. He obtained his Bachelor of Music with a concentration in studio engineering, which is so cool, by the way. And he has his MBA in economics as well. And when he's not helping Medicus get to the next step, he is with he loves aviation and spending time with his wife and 3 great kids. So welcome, Steve.
Awesome, thank you. And
then next up, we are happy to always have Tim with us. So Tim is our Chief Revenue Officer here at Medicus. He is an entrepreneur, innovator, adventurer, and just all around awesome guy. He's also been a business owner for 2 decades, so he definitely understands what a lot of your different organizations go through. Before joining Medicus, he was also a chief revenue officer and ran the IT services firm Atreon, which is a 160 million, 260 plus employee organization. He founded his own companies. He held the position of chief managed services. He has a book on leadership, if you've seen him in Barnes and Noble, if those really exist anymore. And anyways, we're very excited to have him here to help speak on this topic. So without further ado, Tim, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you, Risa. I appreciate it. Steve, she makes us sound so exciting, doesn't she?
Well, yeah. And you know what I noticed, Tim, is these Zoom calls, they make our hair look grayer than they really are. I mean, the pictures show the real deal. I don't know what this Zoom is all about.
No one goes gray in their 30s. That's all I can say. So Steve, welcome to the waiting room. It seems like we've been meeting a lot here in the last few weeks, but over the course of this last month, we've had 2 major events that are going on. We've had this being the Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and we've also the Breast Cancer Awareness Month as well. So we're going to talk about cybersecurity, but you want to share a little insight about what we're doing about breast cancer awareness here at Medicus?
Yeah, for sure. So, hopefully we have some Medicus IT clients on the call, and just a reminder that, it is Breast Cancer Awareness Month, and we love to contribute, to the cause. And, as a client, that, for each ticket that we do, we send out a little survey at the end to kind of get your feedback. So, during this month, each ticket feedback that we get, we're actually donating $1. So really want to encourage you guys to help us write a big check at the end of the month. So just pay attention, tell your teams, submit a review so that we can all help the cause a little bit.
That's awesome. I know we do hundreds and hundreds of tickets a day. So it's hopefully that number will add up pretty big, and we'll be able to make a healthy donation at the end of the month.
Be awesome.
Yeah. So let's kind of talk about cybersecurity a little bit, Steve. I know it's been, there's been a lot of webinars going on this month. There's been a lot of events that have happened around cybersecurity, a lot of blogs, a lot of discussion groups around security. And it seems like all the groups that I've been part of and hearing, there's kind of been what I would say, a couple of things that really stood out. I think number one, the general consensus is that we're hearing is that it's not a matter of if you're going to be breached. It's a matter of when it's going to happen and what do you do when that happens. It seems like the conversation's changing quite drastically. And it seems like what I've seen is, if I could distill all the information I heard down to kind of 3 main points that are really evolving this year and beyond, is number one is that what they call the attack surface, the number of points that allows people to get into your network is expanding. And I know that we've talked a little bit about the attack surface expanding. Steve, would you what would you add to that? How would you define that a little bit for our audience?
Yeah, I'm a visual person. Like I like to visualize things, and as the intro said, I've been kind of doing this for a little while. I wish it was only 20 years. It's actually 25 plus years.
Yeah, I didn't correct my number either.
But when going back in time, cyber used to be a puddle, right? And then it became a pond, and then quickly became a lake. And when we talk about attack service, it's now really an ocean, right? When we go back in time a little bit and we think about how historically we set up our networks, everybody came into the office and we were working off of PCs, and we, focused on our firewall, our single firewall, and our attack surface was pretty small. And then, we got some remote users and some home users, and then the lovely pandemic of 2020 hit us, right? And then everybody scattered, right? So if you just imagine all the devices out there now, and home users and their home PCs and their BYOD, right? The attack surface just got bigger and bigger, right? And now that trend is only going to continue, right? We have, especially in healthcare and all kinds of industries, we have this Internet of Things, right? All these devices that are just getting plugged in from everywhere, and so this as IT professionals, what we have to protect is literally now an ocean. It's just the attack surface is massive.
Yeah. What's interesting about it, Steve, I think, is I've had a number of conversations with some of our clients, and they're looking at over the next 3 to 5 years of how do they bring in like wearable devices, healthcare devices into their system. So it's not just that what we think about a computer or a laptop or even a cell phone nowadays. It's everything down to what we wear on our wrists, to the blood pressure cuff that we're using at home that's IP connected. So that surface is going to just get bigger and bigger and bigger, and there's no end to how big that's going to get. So this is one of the big concerns. As this gets bigger, the risk becomes bigger, right?
Correct.
And it's harder to detect and manage because we may not control or manage all the devices anymore, right?
That's for sure. Yes.
Yeah. So the second thing that really kind of stood out to me that I've heard a lot is that it seems like the bad actors have gotten smarter. They're more sophisticated. The tools are more intelligent. They're using a lot more automation. And I know that you've been studying this a lot. So what are you seeing in that area, and what's happening, do you think?
Yeah, listen, it's a big business, right? You always use the term follow the money, right? And where the money is, the talent's going to go. And so, from a bad actor perspective, they're making significant dollars off of this, right? It's not peanuts, right? So the sophistication is getting better, right? Their tools are getting better. There's more people entering the market because there's more money in the market. And it's you have people setting up shop. Historically it was a small group of really bright people, right? And now these bright people are basically selling their tools to the not so bright people to be able to leverage and go pretend that they're hackers, but they actually have really good tools to go out and pretend to be a hacker that are actually effective. So, the amount of the not only has our attack surface increased, but the threat actor pool of people trying to attack has increased as well.
It's almost like in that whole space, it's almost like they're franchising out.
Yeah.
The
hey, listen, they're good business people, right? I mean, at the end of the day, it's a business for them, right? They're in it to make money, and they're going to keep going, and they're going to keep trying harder and harder to continue to make that money.
Yeah, and it's kind of strange too, because what the third element that's come up with this is that, it really depends on us being, having the diligence and the vigilance to actually keep on our toes all the time. We have to be constantly vigilant about how we do this. And I think that's the biggest challenge that makes all these, the bigger surface, the more threats, we can never, ever rest. We have to always be on. We always have to be thinking security. And I would argue that usually in the biggest part of the errors that we see, the threats and compromises comes from the user making a mistake. Error, right?
Yeah. And it's not just, we hear about the phishing campaigns, right? And end users clicking, right? That continues to be the biggest entry point, right? And we see companies taking security more seriously. We're going to talk about insurance in a bit, in a little bit, but when we started, people were using cyber insurance as their biggest defense, but we're seeing more and more people take what we call defensive actions against cyber and implement things like two-factor authentication. But the human element is always there, right? It's always the weakest link. And unfortunately, traditionally, the human is the weakest link. As much as we like to think we're really smart and we don't make mistakes, right? I mean, look at the Uber breach that occurred, right? They had a contractor that had some decent access. Company had two-factor authentication in place.
Doing all the right things.
Yeah, they did all the right things. His device got his workstation got compromised. They were able to grab his credentials, and you normally say, hey, no big deal because he's got 2FA. Well, they basically wore him down with 2FA requests, right? We all have our phone now and these requests pop up, and eventually he just happened to hit okay. And it was really a bad actor getting him to approve a login request, and boom, they're in, right? Wow. So, we try to put the best defenses in, but ultimately the human steps in.
I think we use this, the analogy stuff here. I mean, in the past, it was like driving down a rural road with not a lot of traffic. You didn't have a lot to worry about, but now we're in rush hour traffic, cars zooming in and out. You got to constantly be vigilant. And I think that what we're seeing is that it's not just vigilant in us making sure that we're not doing the right things, but we have to, be vigilant in being able to make the investments in our organization in the right areas to help us be able to improve that security posture to begin with. And before, like you said, we could take a back seat and kind of wait for the insurance money. If something happened, we had the insurances that was our backstop. It was our kind of last line of defense, and it was the stopgap for everything. Yep. But that's changing. Our webinar that we did about 4 months ago, we talked about how the insurance companies, cybersecurity insurance companies, are changing what you have to do to be able to just get approved for insurance.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. It's getting more difficult, right? Again, it's follow the money, right? Yeah. And now the money is ending up in insurance claims, right? So the insurance company, right, they're gonna put up a little bit more of a wall and say, hey, wait a second, right? There's no free lunch here, right? If we're gonna insure you, and the ocean, we now have an ocean that we have to defend. I need to make sure that your posture is correct. So I'm going to make sure that you have at least certain things in place, right? So they're going to start demanding more. There's going to be probably more gotchas in the policy in terms of making sure you answer right. But the other side of that is, you're seeing nation states now. I think France was the first one to say that, hey, you can't pay a ransom claim. Right. So if you do get ransom, even if you have insurance could potentially cover that payment. The governments are not going to allow it. Right. So that's definitely going to impact the game as well.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a game changer as that becomes to evolve and more countries adopt that policy. Right. Because today, this is where a lot of the cyber criminals are making their money, is off those ransom.
Off the ransoms. Yeah. And we still have, I think it's the last number I saw was still 60+% of companies that get hit with ransom end up paying some kind of ransom, right? So it's still a big part of it.
I know that when we did the anatomy of an attack back a few months back, Steve, one of the things that we talked about is that the attacks are becoming more sophisticated. So it's not just the data being encrypted and getting the keys to unlock it. If they're taking the data, there's almost like an extortion that if you don't get paid the ransom, we'll not put that information on the web, right? Yeah,
correct. Yeah, and that's where you're seeing, when the bad actors are staging attacks, right? The first piece of that attack is they're lurking in the background and they're exfiltrating data, right? Yeah. Because now they're getting more savvy, and they know that potentially you may either block the ransom or you've got some backups and you can recover from it. But if they've got some critical information and have something on you, then it just gives them another avenue to try to, grab some cash out of your pocket.
Yeah. So as we said at the beginning, right? So it's not a matter of if you're going to get hacked, if you've done all the right things, you're not going to, prevention. Even if I do all the right things, and we've explored several in these conversations, companies that did all the right things but still got compromised. We see the federal government spending billions of dollars in trying to protect their environments, and there's still compromises that happen, right? So that's a big part of it. So I think what we need to look at as we go through the rest of our conversation is how do we change that narrative a little bit? What should we really be focusing on? One of the things that I think is really exciting now that's happening is the technology is changing, right? So we're seeing consolidation of suppliers and vendors, so it's not as fragmented as it was before. Mm-hmm. We're seeing the technology really raise its game. We're seeing a lot of artificial intelligence coming in to play, so we can actually look at events and conditions in a much faster point of view and make better decisions with it. There's this whole concept of zero trust that's happening, that we can put technology that allows us to do that. What do you think about those kind of technologies and how it's going to change the game a little bit?
Yeah, so it's encouraging to see, right? I think more companies, even small companies, are taking cyber a bit more seriously. Like I mentioned earlier, a few years ago, you talk to some clients and they say, I have a cyber policy that I'm good. I don't have to worry about it, right? And we've gone, we've matured beyond that, and people understand that they have to start to build a defense and put some defensive mechanisms in place.
I also think too, the other thing that shifted too, that I'm hearing a lot more is, 5 years ago, companies would say, I'm too small. No one knows who I am. I'm not a target. And that's all, that mindset's starting to change now. Correct. They realize that I could be a 25-person practice and still be compromised and still
Correct.
The pain.
Yeah, the bad actors have no idea who's behind that IP address and how many people are behind that IP address, right? They're just looking for the weakest link, right? So it's there. So, I think in general terms, we've gotten better from a defensive perspective, right? And I think the game to this point has been very defensive. I think the shift that we're starting to see is really coming from the C-level, right? So, historically, we've been looking at this from the bottom up, right? What defensive measures are we going to put in place? How are we going to protect our infrastructure? And, kind of the table stakes of making sure we have backups and a disaster recovery plan. And, if the worst case happens, we know we can recover our data. But, from the C-suite and as leaders, they're starting to really look at this as a true risk, as they should, right? This is a risk to the business. And so I think we're going to start to see more of a trend of the C-suite. They don't understand all the technology and all the cyber, but they understand risk. Yeah. Right. And I think the shift is going to be, starting to hear more about resiliency, right? Okay, I know I'm going to get hit, right? But I need to minimize that impact, right? And I need to start looking at my business, not from the bottom up, but from the top down, and understanding how revenue, how my clients, how my customers flow through my business, right? They're flowing through that business, and we're interacting with them at different levels and understanding, okay, as they're coming through, where are those key points, right, that are going to affect us the most if they're hit, and focusing on that and understanding the resiliency and the risk and how quickly I can recover from some of those events that have the biggest impact on my business.
What's interesting, Steve, I've been doing this for a long time. We won't put the actual number of years out there, but it's more than what Risa said in the beginning.
More than 10, less than 100.
Yeah, exactly. But what's really interesting about what's happening today, when we think about it, is that we used to look at IT and all the elements of IT in silos. So there was a disaster recovery bucket. There is a business continuity bucket. There is a cybersecurity bucket. There's an infrastructure bucket. Yeah. What I think is really happening, we're going to look at resiliency as the key driver. We got to look at this more holistically. There's no longer these little buckets. So cybersecurity, business continuity, disaster recovery, they're all kind of being blended into one strategy about how do we actually make our businesses more resilient to be able to weather these attacks. Yep. When they do happen, how do we recover as fast as possible? Right. I know that when we did some discussion yesterday about getting ready for this, it's that the amount of time it takes for us to detect and eradicate an event is like 27 days. And you can be down for some of your mission critical, data, applications for days. Yep. And that has a huge impact on the operation of our business and the care that we're delivering to our
people. And those are averages too, right? And there's many cases where those are much, much longer, right? And I think it's the focus of, because we've gotten pretty good at the defenses, when an event happens, right, we hope it's not a catastrophic event, right? That the full DR event where the building's gone, we have to rebuild from scratch, right? Because the defenses have gotten good, there's a good chance that we can limit the blast area, right? So it's a smaller section. But if that smaller section happens to be the biggest revenue nut or the most important piece of your business, right, the impact is substantial. So, from a resiliency perspective, I think we if you think about your client flowing through your business, right, as a stream or a river, right, is understanding, hey, how does that flow through my business, and where are those points where there's these little pots of gold in the stream, right, that I need to focus on, because those little sections of the river are really more important than something upstream or downstream. And then kind of zeroing in on that and saying, okay, maybe it's an API, maybe it's a third party company that we rely on for something within our business, and really taking a closer look at that and understanding the risk, and focusing on the resiliency of that specific risk versus, what we would call the table stakes of the whole, the business as a whole, right? Because as a sweet seat executive, right, I got to keep the business going, right? And I need to understand where the biggest impacts are going to be. And I need to mitigate those specific risks.
Yeah. What's interesting too is what I'm seeing. I'm on a lot of board of directors for both profit and nonprofit. And 5, 6, 7, 10 years ago, there was limited conversation around security threats. Unless a company got compromised, there was no conversation at the board level.
Yeah.
Every board I'm on it today of substantial size, security is one of the main agenda items at every meeting. So it's starting at the highest part of the organizations at the board level and permeating down. And I think that trend is going to continue more and more. So to kind of bring this to kind of a close here, kind of call to actions, next steps that I think that we need to look at as IT professionals and business leaders, is that we need to adopt this top-down mindset. So Steve, going back to what you said, the C-suite, the board is getting involved. We need to look at it from not the firewall, the access point, the device, but really from how it impacts the business, and really understanding the value proposition of our business. Not everything that we do is of equal weight and equal value to the organization.
Yep.
In some cases, it may be revenue that we're focusing on. Sometimes it may be delivery of services that are the most critical that we have to have. Whatever the mission is, we have to isolate those and understand that. Today, we look at a lot of those things in one big bucket, right? We don't kind of disaggregate it. We kind of look at it as all revenue is good or all services we provide are good, but we really got to understand that. And I think the second thing is that once we understand that, it really becomes mapping that flow, and I refer to it as follow the money or follow the value. I think you described that very well. We had talked yesterday a little bit about this kind of concept of, when we think about security, a lot of times we put the broad things in, we put the firewall in, we put the antivirus software in, we put, whatever in. It's broad, it goes across the entire organization. And what we're talking about is becoming almost more surgical, right?
Yeah. And I think it's, we always come back, everybody understands the sports analogy, right? And I think from a cyber perspective, we've all been playing defense, right? We're getting better at defense. And listen, we still have some gaps. We don't have the number one defense, but, what we're talking about here is, shifting to more of an offensive strategy, right? You can have the best defense, you're still not going to win the game because you didn't score any points.
That's right.
Right. So how do we put points on the board, right, to support our defense? It's really what we're talking about here. And that's taking to your point, a more top-down mindset than a bottom-up.
Yeah, I love that. And the last area that I think we want to just kind of point on is that we have to change the culture of the organization, right? It's not just about training people on how to recognize a phishing attack anymore. Most organizations, when we look at it, when you think about cybersecurity or business resiliency or those kind of things, it really comes down to the individual efforts of one team, one department, or even one person in some organizations, that they're in these moments that we're challenged, whether we're compromised, we're having an event condition that doesn't make us where we need to be. There's one person that rises up and, and helps gets us through that, right? It's the, that, or one team that makes it happen. And, one of the things that we talked about yesterday, I thought was, really interesting. I have a friend of mine that wrote a book. It was called Hero Unaware. And the book starts talking about this individual that passes away. They're at the reception after the funeral, and a couple of people, 7 people, come up to the family and give them a card, say, "You don't know us, but we knew your husband. We worked with him a lot. And I just wanted to give you some thoughts about your husband." So they give the family these letters. Then over the next 7 days, the family opens up these letters. And what ends up happening is that they find that there's so much more to their husband than they actually knew, and the impact he was having on others' lives. I think what we want to do in our organization is create this culture of heroes that are unaware. get it to where every employee is thinking about cybersecurity and how to protect the assets of the organization. They're thinking about resiliency. They're thinking from a top-down approach. You know, they're looking at the most valuable components of the business and driving that.
Yep.
That's really the way for us to win this game, is to get all facets of the organization doing this, not just one or two people acting as a hero.
Yeah. Yeah. And that hero thing, it's funny because as leaders, sometimes we tend to reward that mentality, right?
Yes.
We have somebody in the organization, to take from an IT perspective, right? We engage with clients all the time that have this IT guy that's just awesome, right? The guy is there all the time. He's very responsive whenever we need him, right? He's very accommodating. And if I got an issue, listen, everybody calls him because he just saves the day, right? And then all of a sudden, hey, Monday comes around and guess what? He's not here anymore, right?
Yeah.
And he didn't document anything, and he didn't, right? But the point is that we tend to reward that hero mentality versus trying to get the entire organization to buy into a culture of everybody's a hero, right? Everybody has to focus on resiliency and being a hero for the company and doing the right things and understanding the impacts that they have every single day on the company.
That's awesome. Yeah. So what I'd like to do is ask Rissa to come back and bring us home.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Tim. So before, we have some really good questions that have come in that we're going to get to. Anyone else, don't leave yet. Add any questions that you want to have. This is your opportunity to Tim, to Steve, or to both of them together. So use the Q&A feature. Before I get into that, I just want to remind everyone to mark their calendars. We have a really good topic called Leadership in a Post-COVID World. It's where technology meets empathy. And it's coming up on November 17th, right before Thanksgiving. So please mark your calendars. And then lastly, to connect with us, maybe you want to take a screenshot here or jot down this phone number real fast, and then I'll pull down the screen and we can get to some of these final questions. All right, so here's a good question. If we move our EMR service to the EMR vendor's cloud, say Azure, would we be covering ourselves?
Ooh. I wish there was a simple answer that was like the silver bullet. We could just say yes. I think the one thing I'll add, then I'll have Steve add to this. I think moving to the cloud, 10 years ago, when we thought about moving to the cloud, we were all worried about security. I think the main suppliers like Microsoft and Amazon and whoever the providers happen to be, they're putting a lot of investments in security. I actually think the platforms, when you're in the cloud, they're more secure. But with that said, there's a lot of moving parts. And Steve, I know you want to add a little bit.
Yeah. Listen, I think it's a good stepping stone, right? Yeah. I mean, it's clearly in the Amazon, in the public clouds and private clouds, the infrastructure is better than anything that you can build, in-house, right? They've got the redundancy, they've got, all the things that we talked about, Tim, from the bottom up, right? From an infrastructure perspective. So from a bottom up perspective, chances are you're going to be in a better situation, right? But if we start from the top down, we still need to ask the same questions, right? We can't assume just because it's in AWS or Azure, right, that they're doing everything right? That we still, there's still supply chain issues in terms of who's interacting with that EMR and things that can interrupt the flow of patients. So it's a step in the right direction, but
it's a big step.
Yeah.
Yep. You still got human error. You still got, this very connected world that we're in that makes it still challenging.
Correct.
Okay. So good first step, but still should talk to Medicus or someone, an expert in this area to make sure that you're covered.
Absolutely.
Yep.
All right. Here's another great question. So tell us what kinds of things you are doing today to detect the potential of data exfiltration. And are there any indicators that we can look for ahead of time?
Yeah, that's a mouthful.
Yeah. And there's all kinds of stuff, right? So we're talking about defensive mechanisms, and I don't want to get into all the tools that we use, but that's, to Tim's point earlier, there are lots of tools that we can deploy, from SIMSOC to file monitoring to even just bandwidth monitoring, right? Just paying attention to what's going on in the back end. So yes, there are definitely security tools that we can put in place to help, cue us that there's something going on, for sure.
One of the things that we've done at Medicus, I think that really kind of helps in this environment for our clients is that we've actually looked at the whole managed services space and what is required to really support that environment. And we've tried to take every point along the way that could be a challenge and try to create a solution. So we created a healthcare specific managed services bundle that has about 10 elements that have checkpoints at these 10 different points trying to prevent these things from happening. We're one of the few companies that kind of take that more healthcare holistic approach of looking at it as one system. Yep. It also allows you to check off a lot of boxes off your, your audits that you do on an annual basis as well. But
yeah. And if you look at like the MITRE attack, there's lots of opportunities during a breach to be able to prevent the breach, right? We obviously want to prevent somebody from getting in, but once they get in, if they're in, we want to make sure that we have some tools in place that we can at least we see it there and we can stop it at that point, right? It might not be at the ideal spot, but at least we mitigated some of that damage. So to Tim's point, having those, solutions in place is really, really important.
Right.
Okay. And for the final question, this was a great conversation. Thank you. But for all the people watching, what should their first step be? What should they do? Maybe an action item that they can start working on today?
Rissa, I think that's a great question. And I think what I would say is that part of this is about changing the mindset within our organizations and our perspective, the way we look at the problem. I think that, Steve used the term, there's a defensive approach that we're taking today as our default stance. Mm-hmm. We need to change that. We need to go on offense a bit. And what it really requires us is to ask different questions in our organization. We have to change the narrative. It's not what are we doing to protect our assets. We need to understand what's the most valuable assets that we have, what's providing the most value to our organizations, to our shareholders if we're a for-profit company, to our stakeholders if it's a non-for-profit company, and be able to follow that flow of money through the organization and map that. So what we've done is we've created kind of just a simple 3-question dialogue assessment that for all the attendees that are in this, we'll be sending a post-event email. There'll be a link in there to this, simple 3-question assessment that we've done. The idea behind this is really to start changing the questions that we're asking, to change the conversation within our organizations to allow us to more focus on resiliency versus the, starting from the bottom up defensive posture that we've been in.
Okay, that sounds great. And everyone, we will have that out to you by this weekend. So hopefully that will help you get to the next step. And awesome. Otherwise, thank you so much, Tim. Thank you, Steve. This was a great conversation. We would love to hear from you, everyone who tuned in. Did you like this format? It was a little shorter without as many slides. Was this helpful? Any other suggestions or what you'd like to hear in the future? Because we are putting this on for you guys. So you do have a voice here. So thank you again, Tim. Thank you, Steve. Thank you for everyone that tuned in. Please make sure to mark your calendars for next month for our next talk. And we look forward to seeing you then. And I hope you all have a good Halloween weekend.
Awesome.
See ya.
Thanks,
guys.